Ignore the mess, but this old motor is officially out. And I'm going to be picking up a ton of different parts for this motor. So the intake in which I've been working on so hard, actually, I'm going to be removing and switching up to a Skunk 2 intake that I'm picking up. Hopefully, if you see this video, it means it panned out for me. I am going to be taking off the adapter and the throttle body, of course, but I'm going to be going with a Skunk 2 intake. That's going to be super cool. It's going to match the design of this. And since this is VIC, which I can't quite use without having to like hook up a ton of wiring and power and all this stuff, I'm just going to run with that system instead. I think it's going to be a lot better for what I'm trying to do. I also have welded the plate from my old motor from the exhaust onto this one to make sure that it goes from a 2-prong into a 3-prong instead. Now, what I didn't realize is the transmission's here and the exhaust is here. And if you look over here, the exhaust is here and transmission is here, which means you need to go further down. So what I actually did is order a 1.8 header for the 94 through 97. I'm going to put that header system onto this motor, and it's going to be removing the cats out of this car. Pretty much it's going to go from down there to my exhaust, right up to here, going to the brand new system. So that exhaust system is going to actually relieve a lot of the things, which I was kind of stressed about doing. I do have some questions though, because this one is mounted like this. This is how it's supposed to be mounted. But my only question is, when it's mounted like this, the sharp sides here, the angled side is on the bottom towards the motor. Now, if you go on this side, it's the flat part over here and the angle side towards the motor. So I think one of these in some way, shape, or form were off. Maybe I messed it up. I don't believe I did. But what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to take the other side off and adjust it to make sure it matches this side. I think this is the way that it wants me to do, so this is the way I will be doing it. Just like the exhaust, you actually need a 94 through 97 alternator as well, which is going to be arriving tomorrow. So I'm going to be installing that, getting it all bolted up, finalized for the positioning of it, and then we're going to pick up a battery. After that, realistically, I have all the components in which I'm going to need to be able to do this swap. Now, I'm not going to continue too much further, as when I get the Skunk intake, I'm going to have to undo a lot of this work, and I don't want to have to do all that work inside of the car. So I'm going to leave it outside of the car for now, and then what we'll do when I get the Skunk intake this Sunday, I'll mount it up to everything. I do have a quick question. I had originally painted these silver, and what I will be doing is I'm not going to leave it bright red like that. I'm going to add another coat just to make sure it's 100%, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand down the lettering for Mazda, so it's red silver, it's inverted of what the actual face of the wheel is, and I think it's going to add some red back into the car. I think it's going to look really sick. I was going to do it the other way around, to where this was silver with red accents, and I started to paint that red. I didn't like how it looked, so I stopped. Same with this has been now painted red. I like this little accent. It was yellow and now it's red, just the oil dipstick, which is pretty cool. The back of the other motor, the water temperature thermostat is actually on the other side. So what I did is, this is a little plug, so I unplugged it and then I screwed in the new sensor. But since the sensor used to come out from over here, we actually had to extend the wire to over here. So that's what I've done. Just some weatherproof butt connectors. I use those to be able to connect the two to be able to end and make sure that it's all one solid loop. I made sure I heated it up plenty and then sealed it, and it should be 100% solid now. So happy with how this is the cam position sensor, has this really cool shiny metallic paint, which I put on it, just a little bit of black paint, and it looks really good on the back of this motor. So I took off the old exhaust, and then on this side I took off the intake. I don't know if this brace for the intake is going to be used on the new manifold or not, so I'm going to leave it for now, but this is it all stripped down. I am considering putting this engine in like this without the intake or the exhaust, so that way I can have a little bit more room, like navigating this actually back into the car, as it is going to be a feature. I got a brand new X-Force exhaust. So pretty much everything that is needed from a 94 to a 97, you have to put on this motor because it's early 2000s. And so the things that don't work for either one of these are going to be the alternator and the exhaust. So I have the exhaust over there, but I also have a brand new alternator, which I'm going to be hooking up here in a couple of seconds and making sure that all the plugs work, and it's pretty self-explanatory, easy to install. I had to take off the intake bracket, which is this one right here that goes up and holds up the intake, but I had to do that because I had to make sure I could clearance this. And now I already slipped on the front rubber belt to the front, and with a little bit of tautness, you can already tell where it goes. The holes line up pretty good. I'm going to just use a bolt and a nut, not the crazy adjustable stuff that it was used last time. Maybe we'll see. I made sure the connector worked. The connector looks good. All I got to do is tighten down this bottom bolt, and then we'll figure out where we want to tighten up the top bolts from there. I thought I needed a 94 through 97 exhaust, so that is what I got. But this is my 2000s exhaust. Now, there's actually a lot wrong with this, and I'll explain why. Technically, this isn't the same as this, and I'll be honest, from the photos online, I couldn't tell the differences. But in person, these two are very different. I tried to mount it up, it didn't quite work. My train of thought is by cutting off the bracket plate and then mounting it to these pipes. The only difference is the pipes are slightly off, which means the exhaust that I retrofit is going to be slightly off. But you guys can kind of see how they're in a similar spot, and I can probably make them all line up, which would mean that I would have to, on this plate, either keep this for structural rigidity, cut off the face of this one, and then weld it to this one so that I had a good mount to it. Not quite sure what I'm going to do yet, so let me think about it some more before I start cutting on my exhausts. I have the new plate on the front of the exhaust. I'm gonna have to adjust some of the manifold holds, but you guys kind of get the idea. What I'll do is I'll shave on the inside over here and over here to make sure, but these holes in the middle are perfect. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start welding, tacking, getting everything ready, and then start drilling and making sure that this is 100% lined up. It's not the prettiest weld, but the center hole lines up perfectly. These holes are already exposed, which means I just gotta drill out the side holes, and then we should be good to go. On a scale of 1 to 10, this wasn't that hard. I did weld all the way around. It isn't the best weld ever, and I'm gonna touch it up once I have these holes drilled out, because then I really get to fill up some of the extra holes. Super happy with how this alternator came out. It's a refurbished one, and I got it just so where it's taut enough, but not too taut, and I haven't installed everything yet. But literally, once I have the intake and I finish up this exhaust mod, that is every single component to this car, which means I can start the car and hopefully, crossing my fingers, drive it before the winter. I just got back from picking up a Skunk 2 intake, which is pretty much, you guys know, like one of the nicest intakes for a Miata. This is interchangeable between the 1.8 of the first gen and then the NB motor like I have. So I'm going to go with a Skunk 2 intake. There are some things I want to see. Now, I know that this pin is possible to change out. So I want to see, instead of the 4-pin like the 1.8 uses, I want to see if I can use my 3-pin. And the other thing, which is the throttle body position sensor, I want to use that. The other thing I want to see is if I can use the pieces on the bottom of here. There's a couple screws that hold in these things to the bottom of this. So I want to see if I can potentially, maybe, change this out, use the 1.6 system, but then I could keep the Skunk 2 throttle body itself. It's super snappy and responsive. You can hear how quick that is, and it's a little bit bigger, so I could size down the piping. I think it would look super sick if I kept this piece, which would mean I wouldn't need this adapter, which I have. So what I am going to do is I'm going to toy with it, see what I can do, see if maybe I could retrofit instead of this older throttle body to be the new one instead. I might be stupid, but I think I've had epiphany. This is a coolant line that goes into the intake. My new intake doesn't have this line. This line must be an intake line because where it resides comes out of the back of this. If this was up like this, that is said coolant line. Now, on this, all I need to make sure is I can get a temperature from here. This coolant line is also kind of arbitrary, and it goes to here, which I don't like how that looks and comes across the entire engine. So to clean this entire thing up, I'm going to remove these T-fitting, move this clamp as the only clamp up to over here, and then I'm just going to instead rewire this connector as the connector to the sensor, with those two wires right there. In my head, this makes 10,000 more sense than whatever convoluted system this was, which also means that I can use this skunk to throttle body, because all I'm gonna need is this one sensor, which is the throttle body position sensor, which I know I can easily hook up here because it's literally just a couple of screws. That, no joke, probably took me an hour to wrap my head around and try to understand what was going on with all these different tubes and piping and everything like that. So now that we have this figured out and we have a game plan in place, I can actually execute it. If I didn't say that I was just a little nervous right now, I would be lying. I'm at the point right now in the motor where I have additional oil and additional oil filter. So what I'm going to quickly do before we toss this into the car is I'm going to be doing a quick oil change. But then after that, we're 100% ready to actually put this into the car. It's crazy. I can't believe we're like this close. I had to pick up a couple things. We're short one air vacuum line because there's technically two that go to the top over here. So those two instead are going to be going to this Y adapter or T adapter. There's multiple of them in here. So I'm going to grab one of those. Now, I'm super excited to get this underway, but there is a couple of things in which I want to perfect before we continue. And those things are going to be in regards to this. So I have a couple sensors. These three I'm going to be splicing, and these two I'm going to be splicing, and what they're going to be replacing is these wires over here. There's two that go into here, a blue and a white and red one. Those are bar for bar the same two that go over to the other one. And then this is a 3-prong one, which has a V5, a green and a red sensor, and those are going to be replaced. Almost dropped it. And those are going to be replaced with the red, the green, and then the V5 sensor. So realistically, I'm going to be able to use the plugins on this one, which is technically for the 05 or 2000 sensor. I'm technically going to be using that onto this intake so I can use the throttle body. If this doesn't work out, it means I'm going to have to re-splice on my old sensors and then instead use the throttle body adapter, which I have, and I won't be able to use this skunk intake. I'm going to cross my fingers that that's not the case because I would prefer this way. This way, I don't have to use any sort of water return lines. It's all plugged up and sealed off, and I don't have to run any water cooler lines across the front of my motor. This would be the cleanest setup, and I think I can make it work on the current platform. The car is prepped. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly take off the exhaust because we have our new exhaust, which is getting bolted up. I still haven't made sure that it can adapt and bolt onto this motor, so I'm still working through the process of that. That's okay. But what I will be doing is unbolting that from the bottom, and then we're going to start placing in So you guys saw me putting this into my car. This is the next day. I had to go to bed, but I officially got both of the motor mounts mounted and threaded in. It's 100% set up. Super excited about this. Now, I've already started connecting some of the plumbing, and I put some coolant in here and some oil, but I need 1.3 liters more oil and definitely more green coolant before I could start this thing. I need to deal with a couple of issues. I already attached the throttle body, which is right over here. This is going to get snipped and then pushed down. But this is going to be the throttle body. I already connected the cable. It feels pretty taut. It feels like if I pulled on this, it would pull on this. So I think I have it mounted to a position. I had to only mount it with one of the two bolts on my Skunk 2 intake to make sure that I could get this working. But it seems like it's going to work really well. So have it in a position that I feel really comfortable with and I feel like I can rely on it. There is an air line from whatever this is. I actually don't quite know. But I have an air line connected to that, which goes to this air line right over here on this. And off of this, it goes to my other air line that goes over here. So both of those are on a T connector down there. The other thing which I hooked up, which I had hooked up and then kind of went backwards on, is this little piece. This piece fits over this, but I need to change one thing. This hose that comes up over here realistically instead needs to somehow go down and around to over here. I'm going to need to probably switch that out to a different kind of hose. And then the other thing in which I'm thinking about and or looking at is going to be this wiring that I have over here. I have the 2-prong, which I've already talked about. That's going to replace this 2-prong. And then I have this 3-prong that needs to replace this 3-prong. So I am going to start working on that. What I'm probably going to do is splice the one that I'm more confident in. And then I'm going to work on splicing the other one that goes into this sensor. Once this is spliced and that is spliced, realistically, I already put on all the fuel line, air lines, pretty much everything except for one back there. And this means I need to take out the starter. I need to try to get the starter in, and then I need to thread in the bolts from the transmission into the engine. But I'm feeling pretty confident about where I am right now.